All right, we're going to start our look at rational radicals with a fairly simple problem that has a little trick to it. What I would like you to do is I'd like you to tell me if I have x squared is equal to 36, then what does x equal? This is a bit of a trick. Anna?
6.
Okay, it does equal 6 because 6 times 6 is 36. But I think there's another answer. Is there another number we could substitute in for x right here? Square it and get 36. Quinn?
Square root of 36.
Yes, I understand. Square root of 36. We want a number here, yes?
-6.
-6. Is -6 squared 36?
Indeed.
It is, okay. So I know that x is equal to 6 or -6. And I know this to be true because of our study of radicals. To solve a radical expression, we learned two things must be true. First, the expression must be equal to 0. Is this equal to 0?
No.
No, it's not. So what will I do to both sides to get it equal to 0?
-36.
So I will subtract 36, subtract 36. So I get x squared minus 36 is equal to 0. So I've satisfied my condition of getting the quadratic equal to 0. What's the other thing that must be true for a quadratic to be solved? Emma? It must be in factored form. So what is x squared minus 36 in factored form? It is a difference of squares. I'm going to rewrite it over here. So we have x minus 6 times x plus 6 is equal to 0. So I'll go ahead and I'll break it apart. What does this x equal to? X plus 6 is equal to 0, so that x must be. So here's my -6. Something minus 6 is equal to 0. What's that something?
+6.
Positive 6. So we've just proven what we just said down here, that the answer is going to be 6 or -6. So when you're taking a square root, you can have two possible, so you can end up with two possible answers. Now, we don't always want both possible answers. If you have no sign in front of here, we don't want the we don't want the negative answer, we just want the positive answer. So in this problem here, do we want one answer or both answers? We only want one answer. Do we want the positive or the negative answer?
Negative.
No? Which one?
Positive.
We want the positive answer. In this problem here, which answer are we looking for?
The negative.
Just the negative, and then this problem here we're looking for both. Positive, plus or minus. So we want both the answers. Okay? So we have to start with that, knowing that we can have two possible answers, plus or minus. Okay. So let's take a look at the square root of 900. Now, I realize right now that some of you are going to tell me square root of 900 is 30. I know that. But let's pretend for a moment that we didn't know that off the top of our head. What we're going to do is we're going to look for perfect square factors that go in to the number that is inside the square root bracket.
Ooh.
So, what goes into 900 that is a perfect square? This is not a trick question. Yvonne? 30 is not a perfect square, sir. All right, Beck?
100.
100. So the square root of 900 is equal to the square root of 100 times, well, what times 100 is 900? 9.
9.
So the square root of 900 is equal to the square root of 9 times the square root of 100. Well, what is the square root of 9?
30.
3. What is the square root of
10.
100?
10.
What is 3 times 10?
30.
30.
That's
So-
awesome.
Without a graphing calculator, without any calculator aid, And without having to memorize the square root of 900, we were able to figure out what the square root of 100 or 900 is just by breaking it down.
Wow, cool.
Now this shows an example of a rule that we're going to be talking about today. And the rule is the square root of a times b is equal to the square root of a times the square root of b. So essentially we're saying that you can break a number apart into its factors that is inside the square root bracket.
Sorry, I'm just talking about the next one.
So we can break apart the problem into pieces that are easier for us to manage. So let's take a look at our next problem. We have the square root of 1,296. What goes into 1,296 that is a perfect square? If you've already figured out the answer, I don't want you to raise your hand and tell me. What number that's a perfect square goes into 1,296? Charlotte? 9. I know that 9 goes into this. So we know that the square root of 9 times the square root, well, how many times does 9 go into 1,296? 144. So the square root of 1,296 is equal to the square root of 9 times the square root of 144. Well, what is the square root of 9? 3. What is the square root of 144?
12.
12. So what is 3 times 12? 36. So the square root of 1,296 is in fact 36, and you can use your calculator to prove that this rule that we're using works. Oops. 1,296 square root. So it works, doesn't it? But we were able to solve this problem without the aid of a calculator. And again, I'm sure you're thinking, Mr. Framke, you fool, why don't we just use the calculator? There are going to be problems that do not have whole number answers, that are not rational answers. And we have to be able to do this process of breaking apart the number without using the aid of a calculator.
It's really hard to do that with a calculator anyway.
The decimal answer that your calculator gives is an approximation. It is not an exact answer. So I'm going to move on to the next problem. So we have the negative square root of 64 over 169. Now, this brings us to our second rule that we're going to be using today. Our second rule that we will be using today is the square root of a over b is equal to the square root of a divided by the square root of b. So how am I going to break this apart? How am I going to break this problem apart into pieces that I can then manage more easily? Because I can tell you the last thing I want to do is to divide these two and then try to find the square root. That'll just be a mess. So what can I do? What's an equivalent way of writing this? Trajan?
Number 13.
We're getting there. You skipped a step.
Try and find the square root of 64.
So square root of 64 over the square root of 169. And we're again looking for the negative answer. So then, as Trajan already pointed out, what is the square root of 64? Adam? 8. In this case, we're only looking for the end answer that is negative, okay? So we have 8 over, what is the square root of 169? Yvonne? And again, we're looking for the negative answer. And so there we have it. So this is not terribly complicated. It's fairly easy to follow these two steps. Now, it is entirely possible to have both of these steps in one problem. To be honest with you, I haven't a clue what the square root of 576 is off the top of my head. Nor do I know what the square root of 1,225 is off the top of my head. So what are we going to have to do to find the square root of 576?
We'd have to divide it by 2.
Not divide it by
Or
2.
divide it by itself.
Find the perfect square factors of
Dividing
it.
by itself would
So-
give you 1.
Thank you. So that's what we're going to do. So let me clear this off. So what goes into 576? That is a perfect square factor. What is a perfect square factor of 576? Yes, Quinn? 16. So the square root of 16 times the square root of, well, it doesn't go in? Oh my goodness gracious. You led us astray. But does 4 go into this? Yes. So square root of 4. 4 goes into 5 once. Carry the 1 left over. 4 goes into 17 4 times. Carry the 1. 4 goes into 16 4 times. What is the square root of 4?
2.
2. What is the square root of 144?
12.
So what is the square root of 576?
24.
24. Okay. So we know that this is going to be equal to 24 over, well, we'll do the same process for the next one. The square root of 1,225. What perfect square goes into that number? Should be painfully obvious right now to everybody. Sophie? Never mind. Matthew? 5's not a perfect square. But you're thinking the right thing. Absolutely thinking the right thing.
20.
Maggie? 25. Square root of 25 is 5, which is what you're thinking. I totally get it. So you have the square root of 25 times the square root of
245.
Sure about that?
I think so.
49.
Yeah.
Because 49 times 25 is 1,225. But what is the square root of 25?
5.
What is the square root of 49?
7.
So 5 times 7 is?
35.
So the square root of 576 over 1,225 is 24 over 35. And since we have this plus or minus, we're looking for both the possible answers. So we have plus or minus 24 over 35. So that's how to simplify a radical with a rational answer.